What's going on, guys? It's Ty, and today we're going to be installing the Rexgen mud flaps on a Toyota Tacoma. For this install, I'm going to start with the front passenger wheel well, but the process is pretty much the same for all of the wheel wells, so you can start wherever you want. I've gone ahead and turned the wheel all the way to the side to give myself a little bit more clearance room and to make things a little bit easier when installing. The first thing that we're going to do is remove some of the OEM bolts that's holding the fender flares in place. For the front, we have to remove 2 bolts, and on a side note, you can probably tell that there is some water inside of my wheel well. This is because I washed out this section of my truck to make sure that there isn't any excess dirt that I'm going to trap between the wheel well and the mud flaps. This isn't necessary, but I would recommend it. But if you are going to wash down your wheel well, don't be lazy like me and actually dry it down. For this install, I'm going to recommend that you find the smallest ratchet that you can or use a ratcheting box wrench because there isn't very much room for you to fit your hands in there or big tools. I'm also recommending to use small tools because they don't give you as much torque as a larger tool. The various mounting locations that we are going to be working with today are extremely flimsy, and it is very easy to strip them. So again, use a small tool so you aren't able to put a lot of torque on the fastener, and you are able to really feel when it starts to get tightened, and when it does, just stop because again, these fasteners are very easy to strip out. After removing the OEM bolts, we're just going to put them aside because we're not going to be using them again for this install. Rexgen provides their own hardware for the install of their mud flaps, so that's what we'll be using going forward. At this point, it's just a matter of lining up the Rexgen mud flaps and screwing them in place. For now, I'm just hand tightening the fasteners down so I can still have room for adjustments. As you can see, these mud flaps actually have elongated cutouts. This allows you to move the mud flaps from left to right to a degree in case you want them sitting flush against the wheel well or sticking out a little bit. For the outer wheel wells, it's pretty straightforward, just lock the mud flaps down with the included bolts. But for the inside fasteners of each wheel well, we actually have to use the included spacer. These are used to keep the mud flaps flat, because without them, if you were to screw down the inside fastener, that corner of the mud flap would be extremely bent in. One thing to note is that my hardware was improperly labeled. When trying to install the hardware for the front wheels, the spacer was just way too short. So take note of this and examine the spacers that arrive with your Rexgen mud flaps. The longest spacer is meant to be installed up front while the shorter one's in the back. Once you're happy with the position of the mud flaps, just lock everything down. Moving to the rear, the process is going to be largely the same. However, this time instead of removing 2 OEM bolts, we have to remove 3 at the rear. Again, it's just a matter of removing the OEM bolts, lining up the Rexgen mud flaps, then locking them down with the provided fasteners. Take note that the inner fastener that requires the spacer actually needs a flat washer on either side. Without this, the spacer could actually slip through the mounting hole and bend that corner of the mud flap. Once you have all the mud flaps installed and everything is fastened down tightly, just go back and make sure that the mud flaps clear the tire and nothing is rubbing improperly. And that's all it really takes to install the Rexgen mud flaps, a fairly simple and straightforward process once I figured out where the appropriate screws and spacers are supposed to go. If you've been keeping up with the channel, you know that on my 2019 Toyota Tacoma TRD Sport, I installed the OEM mud flaps, which are essentially hard plastic mud flaps that are molded to fit the shape of the wheel well of the Tacoma. These OEM mud flaps look pretty good, but there were a few things that I was concerned about in terms of function. First of all, like I said, they are hard plastic. There is really no give to them. They are one shape and that's it. This is generally fine, but say you're an off-roader and you're coming off higher ground, you're coming down and there's a rock or whatever obstacle right under your mud flap. You're coming down and there's a good chance that the mud flap will slam against that rock or whatever. And in this situation, because the mud flap, the OEM mud flap, is so hard and rigid, there's no give to it, so there's a chance that the mud flap will break off, and in this situation, that's probably what you would want to happen. But on the worst end, because they're screwed into your wheel well, there's a chance that it'll just break off chunks of your wheel well, and of course, nobody wants that. This is why I decided to go with the Rexgen mud flaps this time around, because it's not a hard, rigid plastic. It's essentially a rubber that's somewhat flexible. To be honest, prior to buying the Rexgen mud flaps, I was really expecting them to be a lot more pliable than the hard plastic OEM mud flaps, which they are, but holding them in hand and just playing with them, they are a lot more rigid than expected. And in this situation that I described earlier, if you're coming down on a rock or something, in my opinion, there's a good chance that they won't buckle and bend enough. And because they won't necessarily break off, because they're more pliable, there's more of a chance with these mud flaps that they'll rip off your sidewall, the worst case scenario. Hopefully I'll never have to test this out and really find out how pliable the Rexgen mud flaps really are. But as of right now, I have them installed on the truck and they look pretty good. As you can see on my personal mud flaps, I went with the one with red logos. And Rexgen actually make these mud flaps with a variety of different colors, so you can choose whichever one that matches your truck best. At least for now, everything seems to be working pretty well with these mud flaps. I'll continue to use them over the next months and years because I really don't see myself buying new or more mud flaps for the truck. So hopefully they'll last a very long time. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, share it around, comment down below any thoughts or questions you may have. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more content. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.